Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to start in just a few minutes. I'm going to give people just another minute or two to log in, and we'll get started probably about 3 minutes or so. Thank you. I'll give people just one more minute to log on, and then we'll go ahead and get started. All right, it seems like most everyone is here, so we'll go ahead and begin. For those of you who have not been on webinars with us before, my name is Jack Kavanaugh. I am our Director of Training and Program Development here with Mentor New York. This is part of our pandemic webinar series where we're just going through different topics and spending some time giving some high-level overviews of different arenas, factors, and I don't know, research tips, suggestions around mentoring in different spaces and pieces of running a mentoring program. So specifically today, we're going to be talking about mentoring for college and career readiness. A bit about me, for those of you who don't know, my background is in social work. I have spent the past I think it'll be my 15-year work anniversary in October of working in youth development programs. It's pretty much all I've done, and actually a big chunk of that was in college access work. I did that for about 3 or 4 years, and so this is something that I'm particularly, passionate about and was happy to discuss with folks is, mentoring around college and career readiness. So as we go through this, if you do have any specific questions relevant to your program, feel free to put them into the little question box. If you're not really sure where that is, it should just be on the little panel. To test if you know where it is, if you wouldn't mind just typing something in the question box, it lets me know you can hear me okay. That would be super helpful. Let's make sure. Perfect. Looks like people can hear me just fine. That's always my biggest worry when we're doing these, that I'm just like talking into the computer for 45 minutes and no one hears anything that I'm saying. So I'm glad that you can. So if you do have questions, put them in there, or you can save them to the end. I'll usually give the last 10, 15 minutes or so for specific questions. These webinars are designed to be pretty high level, so we're not going to get super in depth. But if you do have specific questions about your program, do feel free to ask them, and I'll try to answer as much as I can. All of these webinars are recorded, and so you will get the link to the page that has all of the recordings as well on it, that has all our past webinars as well. So that said, let's get started. So a few topics for today. We're going to go over 4 major pieces. We're going to talk about social capital and the importance of social capital in college and career readiness. To me, when it comes to especially mentoring in, as we, mentor in the space specifically focused on college and career readiness, discussing social capital is one of the most important pieces. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about that and telling what that is and what that looks like. We're developing partnerships. Developing partnerships is crucial to this type of work. And we're going to talk about why that is, specifically with whether that's jobs and workplaces, higher education institutions, different programs within institutions. Developing those types of partnerships is absolutely crucial. Third, just briefly, we'll touch on some program structure, so some tips and ideas and things to think about as you're designing the program itself. And then lastly, we'll talk about developmental relationships. So this is a framework that if you've been on these webinars before, you've certainly heard me talk about. It's a framework of working and developing with young people, focused on leveraging relationships to help them develop into stable, functional, healthy adults. And so we're going to talk about how that dovetails with college and career readiness. Typically, I try to plan for these to be about 45-ish minutes, with the last 15 minutes or so set aside for questions. So that's the hope. Sometimes they're a little bit shorter, sometimes they're a little bit longer. We'll see how it goes. So first, we'll talk about social capital. So what is social capital? So social capital is the value of network of relationships in terms of what it can provide for the individuals in the network. Social capital to me is described in a number of ways, and there's different sort of subcategories as well. But largely, it's the idea that it's the knowledge, access, expertise, and people, and that you're able to get access to through the network and relationships that you have, and the access that gets afforded to you. Social capital is really important, and we're talking about college and career access, particularly when we're talking about young people who may be first-generation college students, or entering into a workforce that they don't have direct family or friends that have been part of. For example, if they want to go into working in banking, or they decide they want to be a carpenter, or they decide they want to go get a degree in biology, but they don't have anyone around them that's ever had to navigate those specific structures and systems, then they're going to lack some of the social capital to help them be as successful as possible in those systems. And so for us as mentors, a big part of what we offer young people is access to our social capital, as well as the people that we have relationships with in our network. So if you think about the value of a network of relationships, of what it can provide for individuals in the network, if I have a web of people that I know and knowledge that I've gleaned from them. So for example, I know a good friend of mine works at the EOP office of a local university, so doing educational opportunity for young people going into higher education who are first-generation college students and low-income families. I'm going to be able to direct them directly to that person who's going to help them with an application and financial aid and navigating the school. And then now that person can help them when they get to the school setting say, oh, let me show you where the bursar's office is, or let me show you where the let me explain to you what a provost is, although I don't know that I actually know what a provost is. But things like that can be really important. And so the elements of social capital that impact the mentoring relationship is 3 big pieces on the kind of the micro scale, and we'll talk about the macro scale in a minute, is the amount of time spent together. So as you're thinking about mentoring as it relates to this, building that foundation of trust and the amount of time they've spent together is crucial. So the higher the youth level of trust in their mentor, the stronger that tie along the sort of network web is, then the stronger that they're going to be able to impart that knowledge and bring them into their kind of realm, so to speak. And then communications between parents and mentors. And we're going to talk a bit about that in a minute, but it's important to also remember that, especially if we're focused on college and career readiness, we have a particular goal in mind, and we need to think about where the mentor fits in with the web of support that students are already part of that may not be meeting their needs. So let's actually take a pause for a second. I forgot that I have my intro polls. So I'm going to do 2 quick polls for everyone really quick before we dive a little bit deeper. The first one, I want to see just how everyone's feeling today. So give me a sense of how you're feeling. Let's just take the temperature. Yeah, a couple more people to vote. All right, let's see. Looks like everyone's mostly doing okay. A good amount need a nap and/or coffee. I just had a nice big cup of coffee, so I'm feeling pretty good. But it seems like mostly people are doing okay. Let's do a second poll. So I just want to get a bit around people's backgrounds. So this is a poll where you're able to select more than one option. So are you managing a mentoring program designed towards college access, mentoring program designed towards career success, manage a mentoring program that's not specifically focused on college and career goals, that you work in youth development in general, or something else that's not mentioned? And if you put in other and you want to type in the question box what your other is, that's always nice. The last couple people, another couple seconds to vote. All right, let's see. So it looks like a pretty even mix of folks working in mentoring programs that are focused towards college and career access, as well as just kind of generally youth development. We did have at least one other. So if you do want to share what your other is, let me know. We can kind of, I'm just curious. But it helps me get a sense of where everyone's coming from. All right. So let's talk about the 4 E's of social capital. The first is exploration. So that's access to resources that enhance one's expectations and chances of getting what one needs or influencing others in order to lead a safe, productive, fulfilling life. So being able to explore what are those natural resources. So thinking about what are those natural resources in your community. What are some of those natural places that we have them? Part of the other piece of social capital, especially we think about what that is for mentoring, is not just acknowledging that we have knowledge and access as mentors that young people don't, but also remembering that as mentors, we work with young people to help them manage and see the value of their own social networks. So for example, if they have a church community that they're a part of, or a community center, or they're part of a sports teams, those are types of things that are really strong and build up their social capital network in a way they might not recognize. Right. And so in terms of their ability to, have coaches on their sports team as adults in their lives they can go to for support. And those adults might know what it's like to, pursue some sort of professional certification, or know what it's like to, advocate for themselves in a new setting. Right. Those are skills that these young people have and have access to other people. And so, thinking about where those natural resources are in their communities and helping the mentees see that. Expectations. So low expectations is a huge factor when we're talking about college and career readiness, because if we have young people who are dealing with those sense of low expectations in themselves that are communicated to them by school, TV, social media, if they're seeing the depictions of people who look like them as people who are not able to succeed in the same way, that's going to be different than, or if they see people in their community, in their neighborhoods growing up down a certain path, or going to a certain schools, or that no one's going to college, or that, whatever it looks like, right? If they have lower expectations, then that's going to hinder their social capital. And it's not necessarily going to hinder, again, we talk about those natural resources. They'll have access to some of those things, but they might not be able to see or value how best they can take advantage of the resources available to them. Education. So one of the things that we'll talk about a lot is creating a resource map to help the mentees and their families to navigate education system, for example. So again, I talked about like, with higher education, being able to access, what is the bursar's office responsible for? How do I go in and advocate for myself if I see my bill is wrong? Or, if we think about, and we'll talk about this more in a minute, but for example, the process for training as part of like a trade union, right? So what is the process for becoming a union carpenter or plumber in your community? Usually, typically, the unions will have various training programs, and they have a similar timeline and process to a lot of colleges and higher education institutions, where it's like they have an application timeline, where like a month where you can apply. They have prerequisites. They might have some sort of test that you have to take. And so, do we know what those systems look like, and how are we communicating that to the mentees in a very specific way? And then empowerment, again, it's just making sure that these young people know what is the social capital that is available to them, both through their mentoring relationship and in their own communities. The communities that they are in are already rich of, people who are able to talk to the young people about their experiences, make connections, build bridges in a way that we want to make sure that they understand it has value. That there is value in their existing relationships, and then empowering them to go out and navigate and create their own social networks, right? So if they see that there's a gap in their social network of people who've attended college, then we know that that's something that we can work with them in figuring out how do we fill that gap in, or how do they start seeking out those spaces? If they really want to go into the music industry, do they know anyone that works in the music industry, right? So let's figure out how we can fill some of that gap with them and empower them to go and learn the skills needed to build those networks. And so that social capital is crucially important when we're talking about this, because in my experience, it's one of the main differences between people who are more successful integrating into higher education or the workforce without as many hurdles or barriers, is being able to say that they have people who are able to talk to them about what to expect when they get there. That they know they've experienced and been inside of office buildings and know what that's like to observe a white collar office in action, or they've been to, they've been on a college campus and they have parents or family members that have done a financial aid application, right? Those types of things are really, really, really important. And when we're talking about college and career readiness and how mentors can be part of that process, helping expose them to these different pieces is crucially important. So what does that look like? So that's college or workplace visits, really simple, but provides young people with the opportunity to experience a day in the life of a college student and the experience of what it's like. I think those college campus visits, if you're working towards college access, is really important to getting young people to see themselves as someone who is a college student, right? So just being able to spend time on that campus and feel like this isn't that foreign, or I can feel comfortable in a space like this, or there are people here who look like me and I didn't expect that. Those are all really important experiences that you can't get otherwise. And it's the same thing with employment. When I was working with young people, particularly focused on, career development and employment, one of the things that would always come up would be, we ask them what they want to be when they grow up, when they were like, 8th grade or something, typically like middle school. And we get the same, like, 4 responses, like doctor, lawyer, teacher, engineer. And that was like pretty much it. And it wasn't because they had a particular passion for, medicine or like law, or teaching even, so much as it was they knew that they were good at like science, and the only job they knew that was good at that uses science was a doctor, and they know doctors make a lot of money, or they're just good at English, and their teacher one day mentioned like, hey, you should think about being a lawyer. You love to argue and write these papers, and so they just kind of sticks in their mind because they know lawyers make money, and that sounds like that's what they want to do, is make a lot of money. And so, but the reality is they don't really know what these jobs actually did. And so, we spend a lot of time talking to them about, what does this job actually look like? What is this experience actually like? and exposing them to seeing what some of those other positions, things that they might benefit from seeing. So, for example, taking students to go shadow at a bank, is a perfect example, because banking is one of those things that I feel like no one, unless you work in a bank, really understands what people who work in a bank do day to day, right? Unless you're talking about like the tellers, because those are the only people you really interact with. And so taking them to a bank where they can talk about, these are all the different jobs that take place in a bank, and like all the different roles that you can take on, things like that can be really powerful. And so allowing them to see, what does this look like, or taking them to, they do this, I think it's like once a year. I'm based out of our Western New York office in Buffalo, and they do this like once a year here, where one of the big construction companies opens up one of their like big sites, and all these high school students, middle school students can come and like play around with the giant like construction, like the what's it called? Just like the giant machinery and stuff, and kind of get to see it all in action. And I used to take students to that all the time, and they would love it because it's just such a fun experience, and they would get really excited about seeing that this, like, what the stuff looked like in action. So things like that, allowing them to actually see what it looks like, can make a huge difference. So second, access to scholarships or job training opportunities. So making sure that you or your staff or your mentors know what that process looks like to acquire funding to attend college, right? Or to be able to, navigate the processes of the financial aid departments at those colleges and universities, because that's the biggest barrier for higher education, right? Is affording it. And so if we're able to navigate some of those processes, and know what they look like for students, then we're going to be better off, particularly just like filling out like a FAFSA and being able to, understand what the different types of, financial aid are. And the same thing with those job training programs and their financial structure. So again, if we're talking about, some of the apprenticeship programs with trade unions, what is the financial picture of those look like? So a lot of them will require you to buy some of your tools up front, and they will get paid for their work, but they're not necessarily working full time off the bat. But how does their pay, expand over time? What are all those different things? You want to make sure you understand, because again, affording these types of things is the biggest barrier, right? And so if you want to, do an apprenticeship with the local carpenters union, but it costs $750 to buy all the tools you need up front, and you don't have $750 to spend on tools up front, then we're gonna have to figure out how to get, the young person some funding to be able to do that. And there's not exactly a ton of scholarships available for that kind of thing. And then really focusing on some of those skill-based workshops. And this is something that mentors and mentees can do together. Mentors don't have to always be the one teaching it. You can have other people who are come in, and the mentor and the mentee, sit there and learn about the FAFSA together. And, then they're able to work on it together and ask questions and learn and grow together and experience that. Same with like job applications, resume building, soft skills, and self-advocacy. I would say self-advocacy, for me, is one that's really important. I think as we work with young people around college and career readiness, one of the biggest places that gets missed, or one of the places of need that we really have. And so being able to build that self-advocacy around how do they, when they're in the workplace or they're in the higher education institution, like they're at school, like how are they able to ask for help and support? Are they able to go in and, identify, things like that. So for example, I'd have students who would come up to me and they would, hand me their financial aid letter they got from a college and be like, oh, what does this mean? And I'd be like, did you read it? They'd be like, no, I didn't. I thought you would do that for me. And it's like, no, I'll help you as much as I can, but you gotta read it. And then, they would be like, oh, well, can you call the financial aid office for me? And I'm like, no, I'm not going to call the financial aid office for you. But I will sit there and we'll make a script and I'll role play it with you for a while. But, at the end of the day, you gotta pick up that phone and make that call, advocate for yourself. And I'll, be right next to you, supporting you, but you gotta be able to pick up that phone. And so those types of skills are really, really, really important. And we want to make sure that as mentors, we're really empowering that. All right, I'll take a quick pause, see if there's any questions. If you do have any questions, you can throw them in and then or else we'll continue on. All right, we'll keep plugging away. So next, we're going to talk about developing partnerships. I think this is really important when we're talking about doing this type of work. So I wrote social capital at the top, but this is a little bit different, but it's similar. But establishing those effective relationships that support your program's mission. So thinking about who are the other organizations, institutions, and stakeholders around you that are also working towards this goal, right? This is how you're gonna be able to do make the biggest difference that you can with your young people. So creating those partnerships with colleges and universities that want to provide your mentees with educational opportunities, scholarships, grants, internships. Colleges want students to apply. They want students to go there. They want students to, be the ones who are, they want to be the ones who are where the students go, because more students means they're getting, more money and achieving their enrollment goals and all of that. And so they want to recruit. I mean, there's whole sections of, college staffing that is dedicated to recruitment. And for many of them are specifically focused on recruiting, say, students of color or first generation college students or, any other number of specific sub-demographics of high school students. And so the more you can build relationships with them, the better off that your students are going to be. So for example, we had a student that wanted to apply to a college that she was really passionate about, didn't quite have the academic record to kind of get in typically, but most of that was due to some personal things that she was going through while she was in high school for a year or two. And so I happen to know the person who was one of the admissions officers there, particularly who would be the one to kind of funnel students towards the opportunity program at the school. And I was just introduced to the two of them, and I said, you just talk to him, explain your story, see what he can do. And he ended up, working with her and seeing her passion and excitement and seeing the potential in her and being able to kind of connect her with some pretty large scholarship opportunities to attend that school. And most of that was because, again, we were able to connect them through that partnership that we had built with this specific college. The other thing about these partnerships that I'll say quickly too is, as much as possible, trying to institutionalize them. If you're working with, say, college admissions especially, there's really high turnover in college admissions offices. Because a lot of people will bounce between different schools, or they'll work there while they're also like a graduate student at that school, or they've just graduated and it's kind of like a job where they'll work for a couple years when they just graduated from that institution before they kind of go somewhere else for grad school or something. So for whatever reason, there's high turnover. So it's really good to have relationships with the specific, college recruitment and admissions staff. But more importantly, you want to have a relationship with the admissions office. You want your organization and the admissions office to have some kind of relationship. So that way, when that one person leaves, you don't have to start all over again with someone new. So trying to get to know all of the different staff at the office is really helpful, even if there's one person you work with more than others. Getting to know everyone that's part of that office is going to be really, really helpful for maintaining that partnership over time. And the same on your end, make sure it's not just one person who is always dealing with them. Make sure that there's a couple people and they know they can kind of pass through different folks to be able to get to your program. And that's true with higher education. It's true if you're talking with companies or other nonprofits, whatever it is. You want to make sure your partnerships are institutional and not personal. But so specifically, employers and companies as well, again, they want to hire young people. They are really, really, really hungry for young people who are equipped and ready to get into the workforce and spend time working right now. And so the more that you can offer them access to young people who, fit that mold, that's something that's, going to be really helpful for them. And so if you have partnerships with local companies that that you're helping develop a pipeline for your students, or people in the human resources office in the same way that you would at college admissions, that's going to go a long way as well. So building those partnerships and looking at who in the community, what employers, what universities are looking for the young people that you are serving, and get to know those people. So I work with a program here that serves high school students, and they, it's a small community, basically a community center. And what they ended up doing was partnering with Wegmans, for those of you who don't know, is a grocery store, to be able to hire students who are coming out of the program. And so they developed their own curriculum of some sort of like workplace skills curriculum through 8 to 10 sessions. And they got Wegmans to agree that if a student graduated from that program, they would get a guaranteed interview at Wegmans. And so through that process, then they were able to get a handful of students employed there, right? So they built that relationship with the company because they knew that that's a company that, again, for those of you who don't know, has a reputation for hiring a lot of, high school students, especially always looking for young students. They love to hire people when they're 15 and 16 and keep them there for like 10 years. So who are those places in your community that are most interested in hiring your young people, and build those relationships? And then, building those relationships with other community partners, other organizations that are doing the same work. That way you can apply for funding that, you'd be able to partner with, and you can say, we're going to bring 200 students to part of this program, instead of just saying, I'm going to bring my 20 students, right? Be able to partner with 3 or 4 other organizations. Things like that. Look who else in your community is doing this work, and find ways to partner with them. What are the local city and state initiatives that can really help inform them? So for example, in New York State, over the past year or two, they started rolling out the Excelsior Scholarship through the state, right? What does that actually mean for students? And that's a conversation for a whole nother day. But making sure in New York State, if you're working with a program here, you want to know what that program actually means for your students. So you're having conversations with them about it and doing some of that research. You want to, make sure the difference between going to an in-state college versus a private school in terms of cost, right? It's not always as simple as it seems. Things like that. And then make sure that they understand that any opportunity has to be a good fit. So whether it's a job, whether that's a educational opportunity, whatever it is has to fit with them well. So their goals, their needs, the support that they require, and their personality is going to be really important that they mesh well. So we're talking about mentor as a team member. This is some of the program structures. I think this is a really important way to frame this type of work, because most students who are working with a mentoring program that are part of a larger, whether it's school or other community centers, there's usually more than one person who's working with them to help them get through this goal. So that means that they might have school counselors, they might have school social workers, they might have teachers, they might also have a boss at their part-time job they're at now, or people in the community centers that they're a part of, or their family members. All of these people are engaged and involved with and have a vested interest in seeing their success. And so as we're kind of pairing them with mentors, it's important to remember that the mentor is just one part of a team that is supporting them. And so then if you approach it from that perspective, how do you then design your program, right? And so briefly, here are just some ways to kind of think about it. You want it to be highly structured and goal-oriented. So you want it to be really focused on content delivery, right? So if you're designing a program or a curriculum that's focused on getting young people into higher education or getting people into the workforce, then you want to make sure that that program has some sort of curriculum, right? That's about building towards that goal. For a lot of mentoring programs that don't have that are really focused on just kind of general social emotional growth, you don't need a strict curriculum. But for programs that are really focused on a clear outcome and a clear goal, you want to make sure there's structure and there's goal and support. and that the mentors are prepared to have those conversations, or that, like we talked about earlier, that the mentor is going through the workshops with the mentees, and then they're going off separately to do some of the work together. So for example, having the mentor mentees go to a workshop about resume building, and then leaving, and then working on the mentees' resume together, or sitting in a workshop around college applications, and then leaving and drafting a college essay together, right? And so it doesn't have to be the mentor is always the one delivering the information, but they should be part of that process as much as possible. You want to really embrace that growth mindset and focus on skill building. Most young people that every young person that I've worked with, and most young people that I think exist in the world, have some really strong assets and skills that they always bring to the table that might not be on their face something that is relevant to college and career success. But part of the job of the mentor, especially if we approach it from a growth mindset perspective, is to help the young people focus in on what their strengths are and accomplishments that they have succeeded in, and figure out how to take those same skills and strategies they use to do that and apply them to something new. And so if we're talking about, say, applying for a job, and your student has, the mentee in this case has, what's an example? It's not like a sports team at school, and then you can talk to them about the communication skills and team skills that they've had to develop as part of a sports team, and how can they talk about that as a way that's going to help them with a job, right, of working as part of a team and communicating at work. And so for a lot of young people, they might not see exactly how their strengths and experiences in one arena transition to another. And so that's another way that mentors can be able to do that. So training mentors around growth mindset and focusing on some of those skills, especially some of that self-advocacy that we talked about, is really important. So again, recognizing the mentor as a team member. There's all sorts of people that are involved with this young person, and we need to make sure that the mentor is as communicative as possible with other people. So, what is the communication between your program and their school and their school counselors and all these other places and their family members? What is the communication like with all of them? Are they talking to each other? Are you talking to them, or not? And so how do you strengthen that, and how do you make sure that each person that's part of this web of support doesn't feel like they're the one who has to do everything, right? And so if they're able to get different pieces of support in different arenas, or from different folks around the circle, from different pieces of their web, they need to be talking to each other to make sure they're providing as efficient and supportive resources as possible. And lastly, thinking about something like youth-initiated mentoring, which is, could be a whole hour-long discussion easily by itself, so I won't get too in-depth. But thinking about, what does mentoring programs look like, where instead of providing mentors to mentees and saying, here you go, but instead equipping the mentees with the skills and knowledge to be able to go out and find their own mentors, because that's part of that self-advocacy that they're going to need to have to build their own networks and access that social capital in a higher education setting or in the workforce. And so if we're thinking about how we're equipping them for that, it's not always just about that content knowledge, right? Like how to fill out a FAFSA, how to do a college application, how to write an essay, or like, I don't know, like when do you call human resources, and what is an HR department for? Or, what is the student wellness office at a school for? Some of that stuff's really important, but we also have to make sure that we recognize that at some point, they're not going to have us there to always walk them through some of this. And so as much as we can equip them with those skills to identify their own mentors and develop those relationships and start building their own, their own board of directors who's kind of giving them advice and understanding that they can have a mentor that's able to provide them support in one arena, another mentor is able to provide them support in another, and that they're able to build their own support network. And so youth-initiated mentoring is really focused on providing young people the skills to develop their own relationships, their own social capital, and their own social and professional networks. And so particularly as we're thinking about mentoring young people with a goal towards college and career success, those types of skills are crucial. You think about, I think about my own career, you think about yours. The ability to form relationships and advocate for ourselves and network is invaluable. And so we want to make sure we're coaching young people on that as well. And so this is from a 2017 study that adapted some earlier stuff to think about different arenas in which young people, can be or need support on. And so thinking about the mentor as part of a team, or thinking about education as part of a set of systems, is really important when we're thinking about this, because all of these different pieces fit together. They fit together in different ways. And so it's important that we, as we're thinking about college and career success for young people, that remember that they don't live in a vacuum, that the educational success is not their entire life, or that financial success and employment isn't their entire life. And so thinking a lot about, as we're doing this work, I think it's always important to zoom out and also think about, how do these things play into other parts of their life and these sort of other domains that they need support in. And, some of these really interplay with the importance of employment and education. For example, like housing, frequently you need to have employment for income in order to, pay for housing. Higher education can be really important in developing supportive relationships and community connections. Finances and employment, right? I mean, that's, like people need financial success. And being part of in higher education can be one of the few times that young people are able to really develop a cultural and personal identity that's outside of the bounds of their family or the community they grew up in. So they all interplay with each other, but it's just important that we're thinking about college and career success, that we zoom out and remember that it's not just about getting into a prestigious school or getting the most highest paid job or, whatever it is, but making sure we're making sure that we're centered around these different sort of domains and where support looks like for different young people. All right, so we're going to go into the last section briefly, which is around developmental relationships, and then we'll do questions. This part shouldn't be more than 5 minutes, so if you do want to start thinking of questions and throwing them in the question box, now is the time. Otherwise, we'll give you a couple minutes after this. So the developmental relationships framework is developed by the Search Institute, and we use this a lot. I think it's a really valuable model for understanding the dynamics between young people and relationships. And so the idea is that through the relationships in their lives, young people need 5 things in order to properly and effectively develop, right? Adults who express care, expand possibilities, provide support, challenge growth, and share power. And so particularly to think about what does this look like in the transition to college and career, I think there's a couple things that we really want to make sure we're focused on. So adults who express care, I think, is one of the easiest ones for mentors, so we don't have to spend too much time on this. But the idea that, we want to make sure that young people are getting support and care from adults in their lives, right? And mentors are usually pretty good at doing that. We want to make sure that there's people who provide support. And so this is where some of that helping navigate some of those systems really comes in. So helping and being next to young people as they're navigating really tricky systems, right, or hard situations, talking to their family about wanting to leave and go to college 6 hours away, or telling their family members that, I know they talked about graduating high school and going right into higher education, but they're deciding they want to enter into the workforce right away, and that's a hard conversation to have. Whatever it is, mentors can be there to provide that support. And we really want to make sure we're building up their confidence and advocating for them through this whole process. We want to make sure we're challenging growth. We want to make sure we're thinking about, that they're not falling into those traps of low expectations of themselves, or that we're not, falling into our own traps of low expectations for them on our side, that I know can be really easy to do as adults. And as well as challenging those with low expectations of them that are members of that supportive network, right? And so, making sure that we're challenging family members or schools that just, might not think that, the mentee is up to what we know they're actually capable of. And making sure that, we're also holding the young people accountable and helping them reflect on, those failures. That's that growth mindset, right? That just because they fail at something doesn't mean that they're going to give up on it. They're just going to circle back and improve next time. We want to share power. This is all about that, empowerment. We want to make sure that they are granted those opportunities to lead and make their own decisions, and we're there to support them through that process. And lastly, we want to expand possibilities. We want to make sure that they have access to those institutions, those employers, those communities that they might not have had access to beforehand, but we can help them, see what it's like to, work on a construction site or be a professional carpenter or work at a bank or go to a large, university and meet people who have PhDs in something that they're really passionate about. Like, oh, you didn't know that you get a PhD in studying that? Like, here's someone who did it. Or here's some master's programs that they might be really interested in. Or, this is what law school actually is. It's not super fun. So let's sit through a law class and maybe they'll see mock trial and decide that's what they want to do. But until they're able to sit in that room and see what it looks like in practice, we want to make sure that they're able to get that experience. And that was about 40-ish minutes on the dot. And so I'll open it up to questions now. I'll open up the box. If you have questions, do let us know. Oh, this is a great question. How do we work collectively to ensure that students with special needs are able to not only access college and are also successful at obtaining that degree? So I think that's really, really important to, for a number of reasons. One, we want to make sure, again, that those low expectations, right, that we really creep in can be with students who have very special needs, whether that's, especially I've seen that with students on the autism spectrum that I've worked with, or students that have physical disabilities or learning disabilities. They can be very successful. And so we know that, and we want to make sure that they're not falling victim to their own sensible expectations or the low expectations that their school might be offering them. So I think that providing a lot of the advocacy work as mentors is really crucially important. But the other, I think, the most important piece that we can provide students with special needs as they're transitioning to higher education is in that self-advocacy space. Because once they're in a higher education institution, they don't have the extra legal protections of, that they have in high school around 504s and IEPs and oversight that they need to have. They're able to access those supports, but they have to advocate for them and go and get them themselves. And that's a really big difference between how we treat, folks with disabilities in the K through 12 as compared to higher education. And that's where I've seen a lot of students fall between the cracks because they're not as accustomed to having to do that high level of self-advocacy to get these supports or accommodations that they need. And so as much as we can when they're in high school, both advocating for them to be able to make sure that their school and their family sees their full potential, but also, making sure that we're equipping them with the skills to be self-advocates for their own needs once they're in higher education. So again, we talked about building those partnerships with the schools, going to the local colleges, universities, building relationships with their accessibility resources offices, and learning about what our resources are available, what are the processes to get them, and then bringing that to students and making sure that they understand what process and systems they're going to need to do once they get there, because it's very different than what students get used to in middle school and high school, where they have a lot of support given to them without having to ask. So that's what I would say is the biggest thing. Any other questions? Well, I'll assume if there's no questions because I answered all of them during this amazing presentation. But if you do have any other ones that come up at the end of this that you think of later, feel free to email, reach out. I'm going to send a follow-up email either today or tomorrow that'll contain the slides and links to some resources. If you have any questions, just feel free to reply and let me know, and we can do our best to answer them. Otherwise, I hope everyone has a great rest of your week, and always reach out if you have any other questions. Thanks, everyone.